Yes, today is indeed a very, very sad day in this republic. We have a young man that was killed out in Molo, apparently last night. And it is a very sad situation that we're going through here. I think we must take it into context as to the overall problem we're having in Kenya. We are going through a revolution. The revolution has not ended. This is still the revolution. And unfortunately, there shall be casualties because we are dealing with a tyrant who has no solutions for the problems of Kenyans, a tyrant who has decided that his survival on that seat between now and 2027 is the only important thing. But before I go on, let me start with reminding us about some of our principles. And I want to start with just starting with the reading of the preamble of our Constitution. And it reads like this: We, the people of Kenya, acknowledging the supremacy of the Almighty God of all creation, honoring those who heroically struggle to bring freedom and justice to our land. That is including the current sacrifices that are being meted on us. Proud of our ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity, and determined to live in peace and unity as one indivisible sovereign nation. Respectful of the environment, which is our heritage, and determined to sustain it for the benefit of future generations. Committed in nurturing and protecting the well being of the individual, the family, communities, and the nation. This is the 2010 Constitution. And lastly, recognizing the aspirations of all Kenyans for a government based on the essential values of human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, social justice, and the rule of law. Those are six tenets that are the preamble to our 2010 Constitution. And just reading by them, you know exactly where we are today in Kenya and where the government stands. The government does not recognize our aspirations. The government does not value our human rights, our equality, our freedom, our democracy. They do not adhere to any social justice, and they definitely do not abide by the rule of law. This is the current situation in Kenya. I also would like to do something that I do every time I appear on air. The last time I was on air, when I started this, I had said that I'm going to keep mentioning and naming the Gen Zs that were sacrificed during the revolution. There are 60 names that we have. This is for the revolution of June, and I had reached number 20. Number 20 was a young man called Dennis Otieno Oduor from Mombasa. 21, Emmanuel Giggs Tata of Mombasa. 22, Joash Ombati of Mombasa. Number 23, Kevin Ochieng of Siaya Hospital. Number 24, Anthony Macharia Mwangi, a Form 4 student of Isabania Boys. Number 25, Denzel Omondi was found in Thika Mortuary. Number 26, Kennedy Odhiambo Maina was also found in the city mortuary. Number 27, Wilson Sitati was also found in the city mortuary. Number 28, Kennedy Njero was found in the city mortuary. Number 29, Duncan Onsongo in the city mortuary of Nairobi. And number 30, Chris Gitonga in Nanyuki. Those are a list of 30 names that I've mentioned on air, just so that we do not forget our heroes. We must remember our heroes. We cannot go forward as a nation if we do not recognize them. You can see the preamble of our Constitution says honoring those who heroically have struggled to bring freedom and justice on our land. Those were from the freedom fighters during the colonial period, those that have gone through the second liberation, those were also struggles, And we are now in our third, which is economic revolution. And I hope that's what we're going to talk about today. Hillary, I hope you can hear me still.
I can hear you, Mheshimiwa. Can you hear me? Abdi Mheshimiwa cannot hear me. Um, Abdi, can you hear me?
I can hear loud and clear. I can hear Mheshimiwa Jimmy
I
Wanjigi loud
can
and
hear
clear.
him, but he cannot hear me.
Okay.
Uh,
So we go on. Now, we are at a very important part in the nation's history. And many people are saying we are talking too much, we are not acting. We are talking because we are educating. We are talking because we are imparting knowledge. An informed public is an empowered public. We must understand the times that we're in, what we are going through. And some of us who've had the privilege to be a bit more knowledgeable about current affairs and previous affairs have got an onerous duty to impart this to our fellow Kenyan. Because if you do not know what you're dealing with, it is so easy to be divided into very parochial lines and very myopic topics. We are going through what we call the economic revolution of Kenya. And anybody who believes that the economic revolution of Kenya is not going to be as hard as our political revolution is in delusionment. The political revolution of Kenya began with the fight against the Muzungu, the colonialist, and that ended when we got independence. That was the first part of it. The second part of it was the second liberation, where we had our own leaders, our own Kenyans, our own black Kenyans, who decided that they are going to just replace the Mzungu with themselves and act the same way. So they took away our political rights. Many of you who are young do not know how powerful this medium is, how it is so good that we can talk as freely as we do today. Ruto may be trying to drag us back, but he will not succeed. We have rights that are enshrined and embedded in the 2010 Constitution that he cannot take away. We fought for it. Many Kenyans died to get us there. But in many ways than one, we reached our what you call our peak of political liberation in the 2010 Constitution. We have the right to assemble. We have the right to have different political parties. We have a voice in the media, whether formal or social. We can gather. Many people don't know that even an MP could not call a meeting without getting a letter from a chief who had to approve his meeting, a baraza of his own constituents. We only had one media house. You could not talk until the 2010 constitution. Although Kibaki, I must say, even though he did not have that constitution, he had the old constitution, gave us phenomenal freedoms in terms of our voice and our assembly. Now, this is the next period of our lives, which is called the economic revolution. Many countries choose to do different things. If you look at the history of Singapore, they decided, Lee Kuan Yew said, that I am going for economic revolution. I am going to make sure there is no hungry Singaporean. I'm going to make sure there is a modicum of full employment. I'm going to make sure that you have the highest per capita income in the world, and it is today the highest per capita income in the world. Everybody will have a house, will have free education, will have free hospital, will have unemployment insurance, will have a good pension, will have a good life. And he insisted on discipline to attain it, but he said political rights, you search for it, badai. I'm giving you economic rights. Very similar situation in China, where the Cultural Revolution identified the China man and woman. That was during the time of Mao Zedong, but he left a poverty rate of 80%. And Deng, who got in, said he is going to create an economic revolution, not a political one. If you want to fight for your political rights thereafter, go ahead and do it. And he left the country at his death with a 3% poverty rate. He brought it right down. But you cannot say that you have so called political rights in China. You cannot. But you do have economic rights. Now, here in Kenya, we have a great advantage. The fact that we went through a huge struggle for our political rights has given us a great platform to fight for our economic rights. And those economic rights mean that we are prepared to upset a system that was embedded here over 100 years ago by the colonialists. The colonialists came here in 1897. And these colonialists came here after what they call the Scramble of Africa. This was after the Bismarck Conference in Germany, where they decided to carve Africa up and make it their spoils because they had had too many wars in Europe amongst each other. And they said they have found a place where there is plenty, where there is sunshine, where everything grows, where there is minerals, and that if they can carve it up equally, no particular country getting more power than the other, there are some Africans to go and exploit there and land to go and extract from. So they came here with a company called Royal East Africa India Company in 1897. They then changed it in 1902 to Imperial British East Africa. And a man called Mackinnon took over in 1902. Now, this company came here primarily for only three things: to exploit us, to extract from our land, and to dominate us. They're the ones who came here. They defined us, they stated who we are, they called us Bantu, they called us Nilots, they gave us our tribal names, they put us in clusters, and eventually, in 1920, they colonized us. And that same private company became the government of Kenya. That same private company that came here to exploit us, to extract from us, and dominate us became the government of Kenya. Mackinnon became governor. This is what we are talking about. So a private company became the government. The policemen that you see today and were created at that time were the watchmen of this same private company. The policeman today acts no different. He believes that ule mdosi ambayo yuko kwa ofisi is the one that's important. You who pays taxes and his salary that is outside the gate, he asks you unataka nini hapa. He doesn't know that even that public property is yours. We have a system here that has carried on for far too long, over 100 years, where a government just exploits, extracts, and dominates us. It is no different. But now we have the political rights embedded in our 2010 constitution that give us a great platform to fight this. And until you understand what you're fighting, we are just going to keep going and recycling the same leadership, the same ethos, the same direction. And people keep wondering, even 100 years on, why is Kenya never changing? Why is Sub-Saharan Africa never changing? We must understand the times we are in. So for the last 2 years plus, we have bothered, I and a few people have bothered to try and educate, to civically impart information and knowledge so that people are better informed, so that you're not manipulated into tribal cocoons, you're not manipulated into petty fights, you're not manipulated by little pennies that are doled out by politicians. You understand the real challenge before you, that this challenge is a challenge that is not only before us now, but it is for posterity, it is for generations to come. And if we seize the opportunity correctly, if we do act now and change the direction of this country, we have the greatest opportunity to change Sub-Saharan Africa, which has 1 billion plus people, and thereafter face the world as such a powerful united force, like we have seen Europe do, we've seen Southeast Asia do, we've seen China do, we have seen North America continually do, to the extent that it is the supremo superpower today. We must understand our time. Our time is economic revolution. That means that nobody here should be worrying about school fees. Nobody here should be worrying about a relative, family member, or themselves getting ill. Nobody here should be worried about whether they have a job or not. Nobody here should be worried about their pensions. Nobody should be worried about the infrastructure. Nobody should be worried in any manner or form about their security. We should have come together, and this land of plenty, this land of milk and honey, should have been producing for us. What is it that the Mzungu saw 100 years ago that our own governors has been unable to see all this time? This is what you must understand. And you must understand there is a political leadership that is embedded to make sure that we do not achieve that economic liberation. And they're just using a template that was so long ago employed by the same colonialist. And the template goes like this: 60% of us must remain at poverty level, where we are busy just looking for food, we are busy looking for nothing else but very basic needs, very basic needs. And that the hope of those who are looking for food in that 60% to get out of the poverty cycle is to educate their child, to pull them out of it. And if they still don't change that, it's okay. They have a bit more empowered child that can come back and help them look for more food. Nothing else. Then you have 30% that have been embedded into what I call man slavery and mental slavery. They are the ones who are employed. They are a salary away from poverty. They are a mortgage away. They want their kids to go to private school. They will never rock the boat because they have too much to lose and they do not want to go back to poverty. They are too embedded in looking and struggling for their daily needs to maintain a particular lifestyle. And then you have what you call the 10%. The 10% are those who actually are status quo. They want the status quo to remain, of which only 1% of those are truly governing and running this country. This is a template that was put in by the colonialists, and it has not changed since independent Kenya. That 10% is the one that says, if you are Mijikenda and your boss is at the table of the president, then the Mijikenda are full because your chief, your kingpin is eating. That means even you're eating. You, if you are a Mukamba and your boss is up there, your kingpin is up there and he's sharing the cake in that 10%, even you are getting full. This is myopic, it is colonial, it is pathetic in thinking. We are at a point of economic liberation, and these people do not want us to get it because to emancipate us economically means that we become people that are moved by ideology, by reason. We have time to think and absorb what is correct and upward leadership. They don't want that. They are bereft of ideas. They have gone back to the old template, and that's what they're about. And I want to then add categorically here that something happened after the 2010 constitution. Something happened in this country after Mwai Kibaki left power. And that something was an enslavery that has been put on us, a chain that will be with us for the next 60 years unless we cut it off. This life that we're living, this agony that Kenyans have got economically will not change unless we cut off this chain that was then added to us after we got our political rights. After we attained our political rights, a regime deliberately enslaved us with a chain which is so phenomenal. And we've been trying to tell people what this chain is for the last 2 years or so. Fortunately, we are now seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, but we still have a long way to go in terms of education. This chain is a chain called debt. A new thing was created that has never been there before. This is not ordinary debt. It is not the debt of a man called President Moi. It is not the debt of Mwai Kibaki. It is a new kind of chain, one that has enslaved us, and you need to understand it. And unless we understand it, and unless we are clear about what we are to do, we can remove Ruto today, the problem will still be there. We will still be asking what happened. And when if we start asking what happened, we'll be asking ourselves, my God, have we no hope in this country? And that's when you see a country literally become a banana republic because the populace lose all hope in anything called leadership. What happened is that in 2013, 2014, the regime of Uhuru Ruto decided that they are economically going to enslave us. for generations to come. They decided that the new constitution and its financial laws do not work for them. It does not work for the enslavement of Kenyans. It is going to emancipate us. It is going to liberate us. It is going to enlighten us. It is going to create a new kind of politics in this country that is about ideology. Those of you who are in the diaspora understand ideological politics. It is the one premised on whether you're left or right, whether you're Democrat or you're Republican, whether you're liberal or conservative. It is ideological. And a lot of the basis is economic, whether you're socialist or you're capitalist. It's normally the foundation. What is your economic model? And what happened about 12 years ago is that the new constitution embedded our social and economic rights that became a mandate of a government to perform. And the only way you're going to stop that mandate is to make sure that there's no money in the coffers of government. There is normal debt and there is abnormal debt. What was created here was debt that never came to build anything. Didn't build a bridge, a borehole, a road, nothing. This was debt that entered people's stomachs and we are paying for it. It's like somebody taking a loan in your name and it's your security, your salary that pays it, and they're the ones enjoying all the benefit, and they have taken off and nobody can touch them. This is what happened 12 years ago. It was a systematic scheme to enslave Kenyans, and this current president was deeply embedded in it. Deeply embedded in it. I even believe he may have been the bigger architect of it. I did the MOU for the two of them. I believed that supporting Uhuru Ruto in 2013 was going to be a change for this country. We had a new constitution. I believed that we were going to deal with the scourge and the monster of tribalism. We were bringing two warring tribes that had just fought so viciously just a few years ago in 2007. Together, we're creating peace. And we had this great belief that if the two communities are not killing each other, there's no fight. Because those two communities have fought from the Moi era. A government of Moi that instigated clashes against the community of Kikuyus that lived in the Rift Valley. We strongly believed we were going to bury tribalism with that. It had brought out the worst of us in 2007. And we believed categorically that this, and I was not alone, many of us believed in it, that this was going to be one clear solution so we can put it aside, create a new governance platform with a new constitution, and also a new generation in power. Kibaki were the age of our fathers. So this was a new generation into power who had new education, had different thinking, different exposure, a time to bring in ideological politics and to bring out the emancipation economically of Kenyans. I believe my generation was going to do it. And I was confident. My good friend Uhuru Kenyatta, I grew up with him from when we were in high school. We had similar upbringing. We knew the world. We had exposure. We were certain that this was going to be the time that this country was going to change dramatically. We believed William Ruto had the simplicity of a humble background that we did not have, that he would bring the debate of those that we may not be seeing on the table and make sure that we create a new template for Kenya. And I say categorically on this show that I was instrumental in bringing them. I accept that, and I've accepted it since. It did not take long. And I can tell you, we were very clear. One of the things we used to do when we sat together, and we did so very often, whether in my home or in their homes, is that we had a prayer. And the prayer began this way, that if Kenyans save them, they shall save the country. And if they do not save the country, the country shall get rid of them. It was premised on repentance. They did not repent. And I can tell you, we fell out within months because people decided they are not going to repent. They decided that Kenya is going to be their kingdom, their territory. And they are going to make sure that people are downtrodden. And they started something that was most frightening. Most frightening. We had the first Eurobond, and I'll start there. $2 billion Eurobond that was purchased from all over the world through a facilitating bank called JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase were the ones that got a lot of capital put together and raised the first $2 billion. This money was so called to be used at a lower interest rate. At the time, it was just under 6% interest rate. So that now, as was argued by the government, so that now they do not borrow locally from our domestic market to sustain any shortfalls in the budget deficit. And this was argued publicly, stated publicly by the president at the time. Little did some of us know that it was purely a heist. Our laws are very clear. Our new constitution is very clear. Our Public Finance Management Act is very clear. The first thing it says is that all monies must be deposited in the consolidated account, which is the account in the central bank, which is called exchequer account. All monies that are to be received by any party, whether it is a loan, whether it is tax revenue, must go to the consolidated account. That is the first thing. Number two, in the PFM, it is categorical that all monies that are borrowed must be for development. We are not allowed to borrow any money for recurrent expenditure. So when the president was saying that he is borrowing the Eurobond money to starve off our domestic borrowing, he should have implied that this is going towards projects. In fact, if you look at the prospectus that JP Morgan Chase pushed out to the world, it was to go for development. They listed a letter from the then CS Finance, Rutos, talking about the various projects that Kenyan government needs funded for the good of this nation. They had very many infrastructure projects to environment projects, to all sorts of things. That is on the prospectus. What they didn't tell you, and they didn't think that any of us would ever bother telling you, is that any item that is funded on debt, any item that is funded without taxes, is in the budget of Kenya. It is stately in the budget, and a vote head is created. So much money is coming towards this project, it is passed in the budget. This prospectus went out in March 2014. There was no budget that this was funding. There was nothing in the line items of the budget that had been passed in the previous June that had anything to do with any Eurobond funding or even any domestic debt funding. It was not there. And then they decided that once they do this, they are not going to borrow locally. It is a man called Jacob Juma who came up to me a few months later and told me, Jimmy, something is wrong here. They have still borrowed domestically, And at the same time, we cannot find in the finance books, what are called quarterly reports from the Ministry of from the Treasury, we cannot find this Eurobond, what it has done. And we decided to raise some questions. Now, I must tell you, a lot of people at the time the Eurobond was being taken advised against it and said, this is borrowing for consumption. It is illegal, it should not be done, even within the Treasury and within the central bank. But the two of them, with the Minister of Finance called Rutos, said, rubbish, they are going to go ahead and do it. When we investigated, unfortunately, they gave us the documents because we created a lot of noise about it. We found, yes, sure enough, $2 billion was raised by JP Morgan Chase. And it was banked at JP Morgan Chase. What we didn't know then, but we got to understand much later, was that an account had been opened at JP Morgan Chase. And that account was called Sovereign Wealth Fund Kenya. Sovereign Wealth Fund Kenya. And the two signatories were the Bernard Ndungu, who is the accountant general, and his deputy of the Treasury. They opened an account, JP Morgan Chase in New York, where those funds were received. And they were the two signatories. And they were the ones to decide where it goes. Remember, the law is very, very clear. You cannot receive money other than in the account of consolidated fund. That account is Article 206 of the Constitution, and it reads like this: there is established the consolidated fund, into which is paid all money raised or received by and on behalf of the national government, except money that A, is reasonably excluded from the fund by an act of parliament. That is, for example, the Petroleum Levy Fund or the Housing Fund, which they recently created, an act of parliament. And two, may, under an act of parliament, be retained by a state organ that received it for the purpose of defraying the expenses of the state organ, if this is called A and E. All right? But remember, again, under an act of parliament. A and B are the only exceptions that money does not enter the consolidated fund, which is based at the central bank. Now, when we said, how was this money being received in New York? And how are these people the ones who are distributing it? So we asked for this distribution. Show us that this money was transferred to Central Bank of Kenya, consolidated fund. What we found is that $650 million went to Standard Chartered Bank to pay a loan on behalf of what was called a syndicated loan that Mwai Kibaki took of 650 of Barclays Bank, but through Standard Chartered. That they showed us a SWIFT. It was directly from New York out that way. The second one of 350, they showed us a SWIFT from New York right to the consolidated fund. So we said, okay, that accounts for $1 billion. Can you kindly show us where the other $1 billion go? This was now done in May 2014. We asked, where is the other $1 billion? When we asked that, we were shown documents. Rotich put them out on the internet. And he said, we have documents here that show you that this bond was so good that we did tap sales of $850 million. Those tap sales were done in December by Citibank, London, and he showed us a transfer from Citibank, London to Consolidated Fund of $850 million. A SWIFT transfer was also shown, right? And it was direct, Citibank, London, direct to Consolidated Fund. We said, that's very good. Now you're showing us another 850, sour. But the original 2 billion, there's 1 billion we have not seen, dollars. He said, oh, that JP Morgan hung on to until September 2014 and transferred to us. We said, please, we want to see the transfer SWIFT like you have shown us with all the others. They indeed publicized the SWIFT, but that SWIFT was redacted. It did not show us where the money went. And that is where, helter-skelter, we hit the roof. We hit the roof. Where is that $1 billion? And that became the subject under which has not been concluded today. That money did not enter the consolidated fund. And any report you read, whether it was from Edward Auko to what, you start seeing all sorts of funny reasoning as to why. Now we asked, how is this money going all over the place? It's not in its consolidated account, so the Auditor General cannot see it. The Controller of Budget does not approve its removal. What is all this nonsense? Only for us to find that indeed in March 2014, when they were going out for the Eurobond, Honorable Duale, who was then the majority leader, had taken an amendment to the Public Finance Management Act, and he called it an Amendment to Public Finance Management Act 2014. This amendment was an amendment of the Constitution through an Act of Parliament. And what it did, if you remember my reading of Article 206, it had two exceptions to when money does not enter the consolidated fund, A and B. They added C and D in PFM, because in PFM, it was copy-pasted as per the Constitution, Article 206, and pasted. Now they amended it and added C and D in an Act of Parliament to show you how a criminal operates. It was deliberate. And C and D go like this. C, disbursed directly to the suppliers where the loan, in other words, exception to entering the consolidated fund, disbursed directly to the suppliers where the loan is a government-to-government loan and is raised for the purpose of financing goods and services provided by a supplier outside Kenya, to do with loans. D, in the case of an external loan or external government security applied in part to pay at closing pre-negotiated expenses associated solely with exhaustively with the borrowing, including but not limited to the fees, commissions, expenses of lenders, financial arrangers, managers, book runners, fiscal agents, trustees, paying agents, exchange, information agents, syndicate agents, counsel, clearing agents, listing agents, stock exchange, rating agencies, and other expenses of a similar nature arising from an external loan or external government security. They amended the Constitution through an Act of Parliament and added C and D, which has nothing else to do but to do with loans. It is amazing that the Attorney General at the time, Githu Muigai, approved this criminality, because an act, any amendment to any act must go through the AG, it must go through cabinet, and from cabinet it goes to parliament. They deliberately created criminality in order to create our enslavement. The $1 billion was just the beginning of a heist. It whet their appetite. And let me articulate as quickly as I can what their appetite became. What you look at is what had happened, what you call a primary account. What are the accounts of government? What are the expenses? And what are the revenues? So we bothered to look and do the numbers from 2013 all the way to 2023. We said, let us do some numbers. And I hope, Hillary, you have a pen. Please note down these numbers. It simply goes this way. We looked at all the expenses. What was development in the budget? It was 6 trillion for those 10 years. What were the county expenses? What were the salaries? What were the pensions? What were the operations of government? In other words, police, petrol, and so on, travel, etc. What were those expenses? What did they come to? And my good numbers people did a figure, and it came to exactly 16.4 trillion. I said, higher, so that seems okay. Now, what were the revenues? We looked at KRA, We looked at what the government had stated, what central bank was stated, and we came down to a figure of 13.3 trillion. If you look at the numbers, you see the difference. It's 1 trillion something. 1.2, 1.3 trillion was the difference. Now, that is a shortfall for 10 years. That's the budget deficit. That is all that we required. But what did we borrow? We borrowed a total of 7.7 trillion in the same 10 years. 6.4 or so trillion of what we did not need is not on any budget line. It did not enter the consolidated fund. It financed nothing. Nothing. And just to shock you, more, what did we pay towards the payment of debt? In those 10 years, up to the time Uhuru left, we had paid 5.6. And then in the first financial year of William Samoei Ruto, we paid another 1.4. You can see categorically that is 7 trillion we paid towards this debt. And as we look at 7 trillion payment, what is our outstanding debt? 11 trillion. What is this thing? What is this monster that doesn't go away? This monster that up until today, I can tell you, I've just done some figures on the December accounts here of the statement of actual revenues and expenditure. It has accounted for, in December, 77% of our tax revenue went towards the payment of debt. In November, it was 78. Our taxes are going 70% plus towards nothing else but the payment of this debt. It never ends. These numbers never come down. And more of our taxes, 70 shillings of every 100 plus, is going towards it. If you do not deal with this, you will never deal with it. 1.3 trillion was for 10 years. If they took 6.4 above, that is a deficit for the next 60 years they took in advance. All right? 10 years is one. So 6.4 is 10 years, is 60 years that they've taken in advance, that will keep compounding and eating us and eating us and eating us. Every time we produce, anytime we work, anytime we do anything, we are paying 70% of the taxes that we are contributing towards this monster. And yet people are thinking the problem is Ruto flying all over the place, or Ruto stealing here, these peanuts he's stealing. This is the biggest theft to our lives, our livelihoods, our future. It is our enslavement. And unless we say we are going to cut it off, there's nothing else we are doing here. We are wasting time. You can remove Ruto, put who you want. If they do not cut off this thing, it is not about just jailing people. If we do not cut off this slavery, this particular slavery, we are doomed as a nation. And what has happened is that William Ruto, because he was a participant in it, he has enjoyed the spoils of it. He cannot revisit it. He is living the legacy of their regime. That is what has happened. He can't turn it around. He has now got it on his plate. He can't turn it. He knows he has no solution. He knows he's going to fail. And the only thing he can thereafter do is postpone his exit. He's trying and dying to just remain there until the next election. He doesn't even care if he will remove him. He will leave the problem to somebody else and will be crying the same way as we're crying today. He can only resort to tyranny because he cannot solve our problem. Just a few days ago, the new Minister of Finance comes out and says, we are never going to get relief on our lives because we have debt payments and the only time we'll get relief is in 2034. And he tried to list bullet payments of Eurobonds that are due because these Eurobonds ended up becoming $7 billion worth of Eurobonds. And there is another 7 to 8 billion worth of syndicated loans. And there's humongous domestic debt called 5.4 trillion, which we don't know what it is. We are in a situation where if we do not deal with this, if we do not deal with this one particular issue, it is not about tribe, it is not about this, it is not about that. William Ruto will never be graced by God to solve this problem that he helped create. He cannot solve it because he is in it. He's in the muck. And anything that means that you address it, look at it, audit it, find fault in it. In fact, the audit, I can give them tomorrow. Here it is. These are the numbers. This is what happened. And nobody, in 2 years, we have spoken about this. Nobody has contradicted our numbers. Let them come and tell us, show us where we are wrong. They can't. They don't even want to address it. And every time we come to economic issues, we are sidetracked. We're sidetracked to all sorts of things. I even believe that is why abductions happened in December, because all of a sudden we're coming back to the issues that raised the revolution in June. There were economic issues that raised the revolution in June. It was about raising taxation. When people are already in pain, you're adding more pain. And he was advertising it in his mouth. Oh, by the time I get to 2022, 27, will be 22% of of our GDP. I don't know what we're going to tax. He was advertising pain, right? Because in this solution, to solve this problem, you only have two choices. You either raise taxes because you need more revenue, and there are limitations of that, or you go to default, which other countries have done. We are today the highest debt ratio servicing country in the world. In other words, of our taxation, we are the one country that is paying the most of its revenue towards debt servicing. We, Kenya, are the highest. This is where Sri Lanka had reached, right? And it collapsed. This is where we are. This is the nation that we are living in. And we can remove William Ruto tomorrow. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, he's more or less a dead man walking. He's done, right? He cannot revive himself no matter what he tries to do. It's over. But the issue is going to be, then what? Then what? What do we do after that? Put whoever you want. You want to put the same people that were part of this mark? Go ahead. We'll be back here again on this show, lamenting, crying, fighting, because this will not stop. When you see the man create a university model, that is a new mode of funding, what he's trying to do, he has no money to support help. And IMF had told him, since you don't want to default, you need to raise taxes and you need to stop your subsidies. He has no money to give help. You create a new thing that is going to become a problem. That problem has ended up going to court and being stopped. Now people have to find school fees. When you hear Shif and Shah, it's create a new system so that whatever monies that had been there in NHIF, because you have taken them towards payments of debt and other things, now you start a new thing and it's a blunder, it's a mess. Yes, it's because you have no money. Apart from the fact that they want to loot little peanuts there, they are literally because they have no money. You create new systems, you stall off payments. They are in such a crisis. Government is being run like a kiosk as we are talking today. Little sheets of paper to move monies just for issues of ministries. This is the dilemma we are in. And unless we solve this problem, which is a slavery that was created, that amounts, according to our records, to something like $50 billion worth of a heist, world standard beyond your imagination, we are going nowhere. We are not solving it. And we'll keep trying to talk, we'll keep trying to educate, because this is the issue. You can join his government, you can do whatever you want, you will fail. He has no money to deliver anything. He has none. And we are not going to give him. We have reached a saturation point in this country because this situation in economic terms has created two twin devils, inflation and recession. You try and solve one, it activates the other. You solve this, it activates the other. We have a quagmire here, and that is why the new minister can categorically say we have no relief. How can a minister say we have no relief? What are you saying? We are just supposed to swallow suffering until 2034? You have failed. If you cannot solve our problem, get out of the way. Get out of office. Exit so that we can breathe life into this generation and those that are ahead. We have a problem here that has been created, and unless we cut it off, unless we sever it, unless we say tomorrow we are going to cut off this monster, we are not going to pay it. We are in hell. This year, 1.9 trillion is going towards that debt. Last year, we raised 2.4 trillion in tax revenue, ordinary revenue. So 1.9 trillion is going to it. In the next financial year, beginning 2025 to 2026, 2.2 trillion is going to that monster. In the next one after that, 2026, 2027 election year, 2.4 trillion is going to that monster. We can keep going down these figures. And you got huge principal payments starting 2027. We are in a big problem, and he cannot solve it. The whole lot of them cannot solve it. Anybody who am of it will not solve it because they'll be bought by the same entities. It needs to be cut off, and you free up space for every single Kenyan to breathe. That breathing looks like this. Very simply, it means if we were not paying 1.9 trillion, because I can tell you, as far as our figures are concerned, we have paid off our debt. If there's any legitimate debt, whether it's to IMF, some of the Chinese debt is very legitimate. Some of our bilaterals are very legitimate. It is a very small percentage. And that small percentage will be more than compensated by the illegal debt that we have paid to these funny entities, because it is illegal debt. We have never seen it. It has never helped us, has never built anything here. It has not even paid a salary of a chief. This is how pathetic it is. And this is the criminality that has happened. So if we are not paying 1.9 trillion, it means, very simply, you have a funding for education. A child today in primary, they need roughly 4,000 shillings. You have 10 million students. 4,000 shillings, and you're not looking for any bursary. Nobody's queuing for any bursary. Nobody's queuing. No teacher is worrying about their salary. No teacher is worried about the increment. Nobody is buying even a pencil. Right? That's 40 billion. You have about 4 million in high school that need about 20,000 shillings. Again, nobody will line up for a bursary. Teachers will be fully paid. Maybe boarding, maybe an extra figure. You're talking about another 80. That is 100 billion. And when you get to university, you have 250. They normally say, take a third. I think we're looking at the average programs. You can say the average cost is about 300,000 a year. The parent at that point can pay 100,000 because they've paid nothing all this time. They will have had enough money to save. They can get help for 100,000 as a loan, and the government can contribute 100,000. That takes you to another 25 million. 130 billion shillings, roughly, would take care of all funding of schools. Another 300 would take care of all your SHIF and SHA. You will not need to go to a hospital with any money. You'll not even contribute. You have programs here that can be done that are phenomenal. You can even give tax rebates. You can even say we don't need VAT anymore from Kenyans, and that becomes immediate relief. 360 billion that is collected. You have a country that you can then even offer, and I'm talking about just a year saving of not payment of this debt. We ourselves can offer our own aid packages for our fellow African countries and go and help them build their infrastructure. We have a lot of capacity here. We can extend our reach on soft loans to our neighbors on terms that are African, not terms that are oppressive. And not only are we spreading our reach, our markets, opening up new directions, right? And goodwill from our neighbors, it will be phenomenal growth for this country. I'm talking about 1 year. The following year, another 2 trillion. You can go on. We are not a poor nation. We have been made to believe that we are poor. We can't sustain ourselves. We need donor money. We need this. We need that. It is all rubbish. Rubbish. It is so that we think small. We think about the price of unga. We think about the unga in our stomach. It is fake. This is truly the land of milk and honey that the Mzungu came to exploit. He knew what he found here. And sure enough, he created a template under which he was a huge beneficiary and still is. And still is. But this is the economic liberation we are talking about. The liberation where you are saying, because we have averaged that about, even if you're employed, probably directly about 45% of your tax, of your income goes to tax, but indirectly a minimum of another 15. We've averaged a bit more, but let us say 60% of your income goes towards tax, goes to Zakayo. What does he give you in return other than the abuses and the lies that he speaks? In France, an equivalent country that had a similar history of economic liberation, and they called the emancipation the Fifth Republic under Charles de Gaulle, 60% was accepted as a rate under which one would pay tax. But what do you get back in return? You get back your your free healthcare. You get the best surgery free. You have your pension. You have your unemployment insurance. You have your infrastructure. You have security. In fact, the big fight in France today is about retirement age because the pension is so good. People want to enjoy it when they believe they still got some life in them, right? So this is what you get for 60%. Here, what do you get for 60% of your money going to tax? The man stands up and he lies. He pretends he's a president. The man stands up and he oppresses. The man stands up and uses the very instruments under which you're paying tax to go and abduct kids, to go and kill young men and women all over the place. This is who you're dealing with. Who gave him this mandate? Who do they believe they are? They're the biggest joke on earth. And I can tell you they shall face the wrath of God here and thereafter. They are the scum of the earth. They are not leaders. They are not leaders. It is very unfortunate that I even myself had anything to do with somebody called William Ruto, that I knew him 12 years ago, that I even helped save his life in ICC. I feel this onerous duty, not only to correct that wrong, but to educate Kenyans, on what they must keep as their north. What is the true period under which they are going through? And let us not deceive ourselves. Economic liberation and the fight for it is going to be just as onerous, but I believe shorter, than our political liberation. It took 100 years to get our political liberation. We must shorten this for our economic one. We must break this chain of our economic freedom. I think, Hillary, you can take it from there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mheshimiwa.